representatives from 8 electoral areas, with the first elections held in March 1957. The Lennox-Boyd Constitution, which increased African seats by 6 and provided for 12 specially elected members to be chosen by LegCo, was closely followed by the 1960 Lancaster House Constitutional Conference, which increased LegCo seats to 65. Set aside 33 for Africans. Does this ring a bell, ladies and gentlemen? We're still wrestling with the Supreme Court advisory on ability to bring into operationalize the 2/3 gender rule. Lancaster II, held in 1962, was a more ambitious dialogue that resulted in the establishment of a bicameral legislature comprising a lower house, House of Representatives, and an upper house, the Senate, with members elected by universal adult suffrage, as well as 7 regional assemblies, known then as Majimbo, to ensure maximum decentralization of government powers. During the 3rd and final Lancaster House Constitutional Review Conference in February 1963, an agreement for Kenya's independence was reached and came into effect on June 1st, 1963, a day we celebrate today as our Madaraka, or Self-Determination Day. 6 months later, the Union Jack was lowered for the last time on Kenyan soil at midnight on December 12, 1963, at Uhuru Gardens, Nairobi, to great jubilation, and then the colors of our national flag unveiled. The dream of a free and independent nation was realized after 58 years of agonizingly acrimonious, ego-bruising, and time-consuming national dialogue between European settlers, Africans, Asians, Arabs, and the British government. From the scramble for Africa, which ironically took place in your wonderful country again, Berlin, a conference of 1895, the young protectorate evolved into a colony, and finally an independent republic led by Africans. It is critical for this distinguished gathering to reflect on our history, even as the younger ones, the youth badge. 70% of you in this room are aged below 40, in fact 35. So we do these things in order to pass it over to you, so you know where we have come from. As a renowned Spanish-American philosopher, George Santayana, wrote in his book, The Life of Reason, The Life of Reason, as part of a series, Great Ideas of Western Man, Western Man, in 1905. I quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." We should never repeat colonialism in our country. And Mr. Julius Malema is in town. He speaks with such passion about these things. Kenya's foundation has generally remained stable. But over time, political developments, including 24 amendments to the Independence Constitution, seriously undermined both our socio-economic and democratic processes. This included the dissolution of the 7 Majimbos and the unification of the 2 houses to form a unicameral legislature in 1966, with a lot of serious political ramifications. The proclamation of a de jure one-party state by the National Assembly in June 1982 crowned it all. Autocratic rule, ethnic favoritism, and ethnic violence, particularly in the provinces of Nairobi, Coast, and the Rift Valley, and pervasive, indeed, systematic corruption. With the repeal of Section 2A of our country's constitution in 1991, Kenya entered a new phase of dialogue that culminated in the return to multipartyism in 1992. At that conference, actually, I was the master of ceremony when we were decided to repeal. Mzee Moi said, he was amazing. He was such a mobilizer. He got all of us to say, we don't want any amendment, anything. And then he himself stood up and said, we must accept it. 6 years later, in November 1997, the minimum reforms package through the Interparliamentary Group, famously known as IPPG, carried out parliamentary reforms that included amending Public Order Act, Cap 56, to facilitate freedom of assembly, amending Section 33 of the Constitution so that the nomination of members of Parliament was based on party strength and including the opposition's voice in the electoral body's makeup, the IEBC. This had hitherto been the president's exclusive prerogative. The historic victory of the National Rainbow Coalition, and my brother and I were key in this in the general election of December 2002, as well as equally significant concession of defeat by the presidential candidate of the ruling party, then our brother Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, were, in my opinion, promissory products of the IPPG dialogue. I find it noteworthy that Kenyans were voted at the time the world's most optimistic people before and during the election. This was in accordance with the Gallup International Annual End-of-Year Survey, which involved interviews with over 67,500 people in 65 countries between November and December of 2002. However, the sentimental optimism was fleeting, as several agreements in our famous MOU between the coalition members, all right, and we were signing. My brother Raila and I were on the rainbow side, and Mudi Awori, the late George Saitoti, and then Kibaki and Malwa, and you know that famous thing. Had that MOU document been respected, this country would have grown in leaps and bounds, would have avoided the outcome of the 2000 elections, for example. Was, following a High Court ruling, the recommendations made the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, the CKRC, during the Bomas Constitutional Conference process, which favored a parliamentary system, were discarded. As a result, the public and a section of government officials became dissatisfied with the Mwai Kibaki administration. In a referendum held on November 21, 2005, Kenyans in 7 out of the 8 provinces overwhelmingly rejected the government-sponsored proposed new constitution. We then used to refer to it as the Kilifi draft. And we used to blame Attorney General Emeritus Amos Wako for that product. My brother Raila and I, again, were in the forefront in opposing it, and then the birth of the Orange Movement. Susan, you remember, that's how you came in now, when the country was divided between bananas and oranges. Over 1,200 Kenyans lost their lives in less than a month following the announcement of the results of 2007 presidential election, where my brother and Kibaki were tough contenders. I was among them. I used to say nitapita katikati yao. Remember? I looked at these two giants, and I looked at myself and said, this David fellow, yeah, Kibaki huyu, Raila huyu, nitapita hapo katikati. And actually, to some extent, I did, because because that is how I was able to hold the two of them again. I became the nexus. I became the gum when the country was falling apart. It is particularly noteworthy that my party then, the Orange Democratic Movement Kenya, I used to say, between me and Raila, we didn't even know how to divide the oranges. Because he kept a whole orange, and I kept an orange and a half. So, my own party then, that time, ODM Kenya, negotiated a post-electoral agreement with President Kibaki's PNU that helped stop the violence, at least, before my brother was brought on board by Kofi Annan. And you know, that was a serious conflict. That is what gave rise to Kenyan leaders going to The Hague. And you know them. And sometimes blame the wrong people. I've heard some of them blame Raila. And it's not right at all. I undertook an impossible task of trying to convince the United Nations Security Council to allow us to have Kenyan leaders tried here. And then Kenyans overwhelmingly through local radio stations used to say, don't be vague, go to The Hague. So, under the auspices of Kenya National Dialogue and Reconciliation Committee, Dr. Kofi Annan, the late brother and a real Pan-Africanist, the chairman of the panel of eminent African personalities, was tasked by the international community and, of course, the African leadership to help to resolve that political crisis. And on February 1st, 2008, he brought the late Mwai Kibaki and our brother Raila Odinga to the negotiating table, and where the 4 agenda items were agreed upon, namely, Agenda 1, immediate action to stop the violence and restore fundamental rights and liberties. Agenda item number 2, immediate measures to address the humanitarian crisis and promote healing and reconciliation. Agenda item number 3, how to overcome the political crisis. And agenda item number 4, addressing the long-term issues, including undertaking constitutional, legal, and institutional reforms, land reform, tackling poverty and inequality, as well as combating regional development imbalances, tackling unemployment, particularly among the youth, consolidating national cohesion and unity, and addressing transparency, accountability, and impunity. That was a major agenda, and it was, to a large extent, achieved, except for agenda item number 4. And I must move faster. Agendas 1, 2, and 3 were faithfully carried out. And on February 28, 2008, President Kibaki and Right Honorable Odinga signed the agreement on the principles of partnership of the coalition government. In part, the preamble affirmed, I quote, there must be real power sharing to move the country forward and begin the healing and the reconciliation process. With this agreement, we are stepping forward together as political leaders to overcome the current crisis and set the country on a new path. This agreement is designed to create an environment conducive to such a partnership and to build mutual trust and confidence. We have agreed to enact the National Accord and Reconciliation Act, end of the quote, signed by the 2 leaders. Following the passage of the Kenya Constitution Review Act 2008, Kenya Constitution Amendment Act 2008 by Parliament, the process of drafting a new constitution, detailed in Agenda 4, began. 2 years later, and through a people-driven national dialogue, the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was finally promulgated to widespread acclaim at home, regionally, and internationally. Even though this living document is acknowledged as one of Africa's most progressive constitutions, there are still some aspects of its composition that, in its 13th year of existence, require serious deliberation. We in the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition hold the view that we cannot transform our beloved nation if we do not fundamentally address those Agenda 4 issues of 2008 and those concerns that we have outlined in the National Dialogue Committee, which have christened NADCO, and which I'm happily, as fate would have it, a co-chair. Our top priority, which was to address the cost of living, is demonstrated by the growing gaps in poverty and inequality brought about by harsh and burdensome taxes that take money out of people's pockets rather than putting it therein. And Susan, you're in the business trying to get people to put their money in their pockets. You haven't quite succeeded. Because this is where the issue is. Kenyans are crying, heavy burden of taxation. I have never seen a nation anywhere in the world which can develop on the basis of overtaxing its citizens, particularly during such economic reality. And if anybody has one example in the world, we talked of the Marshall Plan and others, where you overtax your citizen in order to get out of depression, I will be happily able to listen to you. Despite the conflicting explanations the primary causes of economic slow growth, indeed depression, are not solely attributable to global events, but rather economic mismanagement and endemic corruption. The last 3 presidential election results are strongly disputed, indicating that we have not addressed transparency, accountability, and impunity, particularly regarding our electoral management process. That is why we in Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance Coalition insisted upon not only audit of 2022 general election, but a reconstitution of the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission. We too, in this NADCO process, spoke to the deepening of our political gains by ensuring there will be fidelity to the Constitution as regards interference with political parties. The story that has been going on, merry-go-round in Jubilee, I'm a very key member of Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition. It's disturbing. We have had to call a spade a spade. In these talks, we are not sparing any situation. And we are saying it is improper to disorganize Jubilee. Because by disorganizing Jubilee, you are trying to disorganize Azimio. And by implication, paying lip service to multi-party democracy. And this is our view. Our agenda items at the bipartisan talks at Bomas of Kenya also included addressing the imbalance of public office appointments that were biased towards specific communities and poorly represented the aspirations of two-gender rule. This, we strongly argued, continued to undermine the ideals of national cohesion and unity. I would want, for example, a very honest conversation about the recently concluded recruitment at the Kenya Defense Forces. Mukwanja and the rest of you in Parliament, please, if you want to heal this country, and I heard the President yesterday say 80% of recruitment to KDF now will be from National Youth Service, but before we get there, we want the statistics, ethnic balance. By the way, it's a matter in the Constitution. We want to know, of the 43 communities, what percentage did the people in Embu in Manyata get? And you will be amazed. And when I go to the conflict in Rwanda after the genocide, in fact, the problem in Rwanda and Burundi is basically this. 84% of the population are Hutus in both countries, and 14% are Tutsis in both countries. At some stage, the whole leadership of Burundi, from the president to deputy speaker, were eliminated because they went through a hugely successful election, where if it is the majority must have their way and the minority have their say, that happened. But people were hurting. And what happened? Killings. So, in my view, if you disturb the army, if you do not have a professional military in Kenya or anywhere in the region, ladies and gentlemen, you do not have a country. Please, you can take that one to the bank, even if it is a hustler bank. You cannot disturb if you, and the reason our military men and women have done very well in terms of peacekeeping everywhere, right, is because we have had a professional army. But if we have a tribalized army, and I still insist, I want you guys, if the parliament, I'm told when you people in Kenya Kwanza went to State House and complained to President Ruto that hamwezi kwenda nyumbani, wananchi wanapigia kelele because of taxation, he looked at you and told you, but you are the ones in parliament. Nyinyi ndio mmepitisha the Finance Act. So you now have to play your role. If you're going to do oversighting of this government, and I like the young parliamentarians, actually went in at 30, and I remained there. Yes, I think I should have been a member. Now I'll do the mentoring that our wonderful Mheshimiwa was talking about. I must conclude, ladies and gentlemen, before I invite our brother to come and make his remarks and close this consultative session. We went to Bomas because Kenyans lost their lives. Kenyans, some of them wearing sufurias, right? Let's not forget we buried nearly 70 people. Let's not forget a lot of them had their households and everything they owned destroyed. And even as recent as 2 weeks ago, 25,000 people in Mavoko had what they call their homes destroyed. And we hear you friends in Kenya Kwanza telling us affordable housing. What the fellows have put together what they could afford, and you destroy it, and you are telling them affordable housing? So, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot hope to transform our nation, indeed any nation, without meaningful dialogue, and that is built on mutual trust and confidence. Nonetheless, I've observed that during our 73 days, we've already done 73 days of the national dialogue, goodwill has occurred, and both sides have learned to respect one another's points of view. Therefore, I must congratulate my friend, my co-chair, Kimani Ichung'wah. When he came in, I told Kimani, I looked at him, I said, listen, you are young, I think you're very young, and the future is ahead of you. Me, I can go back to Sekuru, right, and forget about you guys. But if you don't succeed at these talks, history will judge you badly. And we must therefore confront the truth, and nothing but the truth. Our forefathers, the likes of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, were able to negotiate and compromise even with the British colonialists. When Mzee Jaramogi Oginga Odinga said, without Jomo Kenyatta there will be no freedom. Now, we should emulate them. 26 years ago, the late President Daniel Arap Moi's ruling party, KANU, by the way, KANU was organizing secretary for 12 good years. I was elected National Organizing Secretary the same day with the late Moses Mundamba Mudavadi, Wycliffe's father. So you can see if Mudavadi is beginning to look old. I started it with his late father. That is the beauty when you are young, you see it all. And I therefore can pass this information, this wisdom, sometimes lack of it, depending on how you look at it, to the younger leaders. Mzee Moi then was able to accommodate dialogue. After the violence that followed 2007 elections and almost tore our nation apart, Mzee Kibaki, our brother Raila, and indeed myself, with our respective coalitions, were able to come together and work on creating a durable new constitution. Our history is replete with examples of transformative national dialogue for the betterment of all Kenyans. We at Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance Coalition remain optimistic that these bipartisan talks, which should conclude with a report handed to both my friend William Ruto and my brother here on November 22nd. We are very clear. We don't want to stay there for longer than is necessary. And some of them say we are paid huge sums of money. I have not seen a cent. I'm giving my time and my everything to my country so that these things can succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great pleasure to invite my brother and actually a soulmate, the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, to come make his remarks and close this session. Well, we thank our partners, really. You know, German, you Kenyans may not know, CD1, the diplomatic corps, the number one, and to get number one CD, diplomatic corps, number one, means a lot. CD1, when we became independent, was Germany. And that tells you that Germans are truly our friends. We thank you. We continue to thank you. From my brother Raila Odinga, karibu sana. Sorry.
Yeah. You may be seated. To the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, hamjambo. Hamjambo tena. I'm happy to have been invited by Konrad Adenauer Foundation to come and be with you here this afternoon. Dankeschön. That means thank you very much. And I mean, my brother has talked so elaborately about so many things. At some stage, he was talking about desperation in our country, how Kenyans are dying because of lack of food and so on. Then I was telling some other people that maybe death is not a very bad thing. Shakespeare said in Julius Caesar that some cowards die so many times before their death that the brave do not taste of death but just once. And I want to say that death is a necessary evil that will come when it will come, and therefore there's no need to fear death. Then the other day I was talking to somebody else, he told me, you shouldn't really fear death. He said that, look, if you are sick, there are only two things that can happen to you. Either you will be treated and you will get well, they have nothing to fear. But if you don't recover, then you will die. If you die, there's nothing to fear. Why? Because you will either go to heaven or to hell. If you go to heaven, there's nothing to worry about. You will be okay. Even if you go to hell, there's nothing to worry about. You'll find so many of your friends. So spend a long time just greeting them. How are you? How have you been here? Before your time for the fire comes. So therefore, don't fear. You have nothing to fear as Kenyans. We will succeed in the long run. Now, I think this foundation has done a very good thing to choose to hold this conference. And they have told me that they're going to make it an annual event. So it is my real pleasure to speak to this distinguished audience at a time the country is undergoing profound challenges with no end in sight. My task is to share with you the alternative economic pathways proposed by Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party for the people of Kenya. I will do that with pleasure. But before I do that, let me thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Stiftung, as it's called in German, for putting together this conference on the subject of transforming a nation. It is proper that a foundation that bears the name of the man who presided over the reconstruction of Germany after the Second World War should get us together so that we can discuss our own reconstruction. I happen to have been in Germany during its days of reconstruction and transformation, and I can say two things without fear of contradiction. First, transforming a nation takes hard, dedicated, and honest labor of leaders and citizens. Secondly, no nation is beyond reconstruction and transformation. All it takes is leadership. And I arrived when the war had ended, the Marshall Plan had been introduced, and the work of reconstruction was in its second phase. I have found when Konrad Adenauer himself was still the chancellor, and at that time when he arrived, when you went to Germany, and then you went to Britain and France, who are part of the victor powers, you'd think that it was Germany that won the war and those countries had lost the war. But Germany had been devastated. Most German cities were bombed, some of them nearly to the ground. There's a city in the eastern part of Germany called Dresden. Dresden was razed almost to the ground by the British, basically, at the time when, in fact, the war had ended. But because of the anger of what had happened, bombing of London and so on, it was a revenge bombing. But the Germans reconstructed. And at that time, West Germany was the strongest economy in Western Europe. And East Germany was also the strongest economy in Eastern Europe at that time. That was basically because of hard work. I want to say that a year after our election, if you ask Kenyans, are you better off today than you were at this time last year? The answer will be obvious, that we are in a deep hole. Failing policies and grim economic prospects. There is a devastating loss of trust and confidence in our economy, our financial markets, and our government. We are caught in a cycle where reduced spending power leads to loss of jobs, which leads to even less spending, where the people can't borrow because rates charged are too high, yet lack of borrowing slows growth and leads to even less credit. Credible data collected and published by the government confirms all this grim news. And this meeting is taking place as a day after the State of the Nation address by the President. I'm going to try to answer some of the things that he said yesterday. But this is not a response. At the Hustler Fund, which was supposed to support households and micro enterprises, default on payments at a higher rate than those at the commercial banks, SACCOs, and microfinance. Out of the Hustler Fund's outstanding, that is 10.2 billion shillings worth of loans in the last 9 months, 29% is deemed to be portfolio at risk, implying it has not been serviced by the borrowers as per agreed schedule. This means that borrowed amounts worth about 2.9 billion shillings in Hustler Fund loans fall in the category of non-performing loans. Job cuts are back to the rate where they were during the COVID. According to the CBK survey, more than a quarter of chief executives expect to cut jobs before the end of the year because of increased operating costs and softened demand for goods and services, setting up families for a gloomy festivities period. The Central Bank of Kenya is the survey that targeted CEOs of more than 1,000 private sector firms through online questionnaires shows that 26.3% of those surveyed expect to cut their workforce between now and the end of the year, while 63.5% will not be hiring any new staff. At the Nairobi Security Exchange, some 6,256 foreign investors fled in the last 9 months. This is 42% of foreign investors in the country. This exodus is a result of the rapid but unstable tax policies that are scaring away foreign investors and leading to low revenue collections. In October, the same National Security Exchange was ranked the worst performing African bus in the first 9 months of the year in dollar returns. Investors prefer a country with a stable taxation policy, a stable currency, and a growing economy. The current regime is changing tax policy frequently, mismanaging the shilling, and weakening economic growth. Kenyans are ditching mobile payments. A number of local SMEs using payment methods such as pay bills and Lipa na M-Pesa are now asking their customers to use cash when paying for goods and services to avoid taxation. Fuel consumption fell rapidly between January and June, dropping to the lowest levels in the more than 5 years. Up to 85% of firms are not paying corporate taxes. At least 8 in 10 companies in Kenya did not pay taxes on earnings last financial year. This signals a tough economic environment that hit sales, prompting some businesses to scale down operations. The Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, missed its revenue target for the first quarter of the current financial year by 79 billion Kenya shillings. Of course, the story of the Kenya shilling on a free fall bears no repeating. It is obvious to everybody. From 120 to the dollar to now 159. I could go on and on, but I beg to stop there so that we can get into what Azimio thinks. The fact is, many Kenyans are both anxious and uncertain of what the future holds. The country is going through a recipe of policy mistakes, failures, and shortcomings served in an authoritarian, paternalistic leadership style. Nobody in government cares about building broad public support around these programs. Everything is forced down everyone's throats. In the run-up to 2022 election, we warned that the sectors of every economy are intertwined, and you cannot benefit one sector by denying the other. We warned that Kenya Kwanza was never going to help the hustlers by robbing the rich and the middle class. In the wake of the Finance Act of 2023, we warned that no nation can ever tax its citizens into prosperity. We are concerned that it is getting too late to change the course. We fear that consequences of the foundation laid in the first year of this administration could linger for years if nothing is done. Our country could lose the competitive edge that it has always had in the region and sub-Saharan Africa. This bad situation could easily get out of hand. What is to be done? For us in Azimio, reduction in the cost of living is a priority economic imperative. This will be achieved by providing some basic relief to citizens, including reduction of taxes and stimulating production. To release resources to achieve these objectives, government must cut the budget by an estimated 500 billion shillings. The current policies have hit low-income families particularly hard. These are the same low-income families that the administration promised to lift up. These families spend more than 40% of their income on food. They deserve and require relief. In particular, we must cut fuel taxes and raise social welfare payments. At this time of duress, we demand tax cuts, not increases. Kenyans need to see their taxes go down, not up. We believe the current taxation regime is not sustainable. We warned at the beginning that beyond a certain point, increasing taxes leads to lower collection. It has become real as Kenya Revenue Authority misses one revenue target after another. Tax on fuel is up, but fuel levy collection is down. We were doing this as a result of our experience when we formed government under NASA. Under NASA, we found an economy that was stagnant, and the growth was negative. Revenue collection was very low, and the Paris Club had actually clamped down on the government. So the government was actually just limping. And when we came into government, what we did was to address the two sides of the balance sheet, income and expenditure. We found out the government was collecting 200 billion shillings of all that was being collected. We looked at the sources of revenue, customs duty, income tax, the VAT, and so on. And then the other side, expenditure, how they were procuring. You looked at revenue officers, those officers in the customs, in the income tax department, in the VAT, and procurement officers in all the ministries. They were the boys in town. They're the ones who are buying apartment blocks in town, the ones who are driving the latest models of cars, Mercedes, Toyota, what have you. They're the ones who are building castles in rural areas. They're the ones who are building high-rise buildings in village markets. If you did a lifestyle audit, you're able to catch them. And we did lifestyle audits and caught very many of them. We sacked some we sent to jail. And all of a sudden, revenue rose up. From 200 billion shillings, within the 6 months from January to June, we went up by 100 billion shillings. We collected 300 billion shillings. So we said, the answer is not to increase taxes, but to spread out, widen the net, and lower the taxes, and we get more revenue. The following year, it went 500 billion, 700 billion, 900, we reached 1 trillion. We were able to finance most of our budget from local resources without having to borrow from donors. 95% of our development expenditure was coming from local revenue. And that's why we were advising the inadvisable that you don't have to increase taxes to get revenue. Procurement, because you can raise revenue, but it all just goes into people's pockets. We found that under Moi, there was a procurement law which says that any item above 100,000 shillings are to procure competitively. In other words, you have to advertise in at least 3 newspapers. And there must be at least 3 bidders, and you procure competitively. Each and every ministry has a procurement officer, seconded from the Treasury, who was in charge. We found that each procurement officer had 3 companies registered. And there was a kind of a cartel and a collusion. The one in Ministry of Finance is supplying Ministry of Education. The one in Education is supplying health. One is health is supplying roads. One road is supplying agriculture. And if you are the tender, there will be 3 companies. All those 3 belong to one person. And of course, the building, the commission, which is shared among various commission officers. An item that's supposed to be procured at 100,000 shillings goes for 5 million shillings. And that's where the money is being lost. These ones, again, we did lifestyle audit. We sacked some of them. We jailed some of them. The government was now procuring competitively. And that is how we manage that economy. So you need to stimulate production. Interest rates need to come down in order to stimulate economic activity. This is particularly urgent and critical, given that in the Finance Act of 2023, the regime is pursuing higher spending and taxes for the next 2 years. Businesses will obviously pass the costs to consumers, worsening the cost of living further. We needed to invest in direct relief to individuals through programs that put money directly into the people's pockets. Which is why we asked the Kenya Kwanza to continue with and expand the Kazi Mtaani program. And it can be expanded the way we did it ourselves there, Kazi kwa vijana, to the rural areas as well. Investment in labor-intensive programs like road construction, rural water systems, afforestation, and so on. This has proven over the years to yield positive results. We believe that putting money into construction of schools' infrastructure would yield better returns than the construction of houses through taxation. Kenyans deserve a raise in the average minimum wage. We should also stop mismanagement of public finances. The country must embrace better fiscal discipline. We do not have to increase our budget in order to look important. State departments with overlapping functions need to be scrapped. Why do we have coordination of international development partnerships at both the Deputy President's Office and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, complete with budget lines, while the National Treasury also runs an external resources department? At the same time, we need to stop duplication of devolved functions at national level. You have a situation where the national government is competing with the counties in several other functions which are constitutionally devolved, like health, like agriculture, like water, and so on. Why should the national government be the one procuring fertilizers and distributing it to the county government when agriculture is devolved? How about drugs and so on? A few weeks ago, the Controller of Budget told the country that the National Treasury over-budgeted salaries of state officers, including hers, by 3 times, leading to the loss of over 1 billion shillings. The Controller of Budget detailed how the Treasury has been over-budgeting salaries of senior government officials through the consolidated fund services. So far, nobody has been made to bear responsibility for this budgeted corruption. We know very well that regional authorities duplicate county functions. Where do we retain them? Complete with budgets. To those doubting Thomases within the regime, these measures above will release the estimated 500 billion shillings required to bring back the economy on an even keel. Realistic debt management. Currently, Kenya is caught in a debt rut where it has resorted to borrowing more to repay debt. It makes no sense to us to borrow more to repay debt when debt is already too high. It amounts digging when you're already in a deep hole. Our position is that the National Treasury ought to ask creditors to push up payments falling due to a future date rather than keep paying it. This is what people do when they have a crunch in their finances, but know they can pay later when their income is higher. Rescheduling debt is not at the same time as the same thing as debt default. People default when they are bankrupt. Kenya is not bankrupt. Kenya should not default. By rescheduling debt payments falling due, the government can forgo punitive taxes and create room for critical social and economic spending. In conclusion, 1 year on since the inception of new government, this is the time to reset the economic policy broadly. And you're not going to set this broadly by mere rhetorics, by talking and making promises to the people, empty promises. The effectiveness of government by key initiatives, including the Hatta Fund, should be reviewed by a forum comprised of the government, political parties, the business community, and the civil society. This is what should be happening. And if this happens, we will be able to come up with proper solution to the problem that we are facing today. The government today is living in denial. If you listen to the State of the Nation address yesterday, if you were talking to some people who are living in planet Moon, you are not being realistic to problems confronting this country. And these problems must be confronted frontally, not by trying to give diversions here and there. We have said today that the cost of living is real and is killing the people. It has to be addressed if you are going to actually relieve the plight of the people of this country. This is our position as Azimio. Now, finally, Madam, you've written there, Raila Odinga ran for presidency 5 times and lost 5 times. In other words, and each time he complained that he did not lose. I accepted losing elections in 1997. I said I'd lost and accepted. In 2007, the jury is out there. Everybody knows what happened. In 2013, everybody knows. 2017, people know. 2022, some of you are around in the country. The so-called Independent Election and Boundary Commission had 7 commissioners. Out of those 7 commissioners, 4 said no. 3 are the ones who said yes. But 4 said no. And they even have come before the Kalonzo team and have said no. And they've said that the chairman erred, that up to now he has not published the results of the elections in accordance to the law. And to me, they say that 4 is bigger than 3. If the majority say that I won the elections, I cannot say I lost it. Yes. And that's why, irrespective of what the Supreme Court said, I thank you very much.
Another round of applause for our guests this afternoon. Thank you so much for your patience. When you look at your programs, were to end earlier, but it was important this final day we stay until this time without wasting so much time. I want to once again welcome Honorable Gitonga Mukunji so that he now finally takes us through the conference communique, some of the resolutions as we go home. Welcome, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Before I read the communique, I have seen some members of parliament who have joined us, and I would like to recognize them. I have seen Honorable Jared Okello. Please just wave to the congregation. That is a member of parliament, Nyando. I have also seen Honorable Junet Mohammed. He is a minority whip and the member of parliament, Suna East. I want to read the communique of this conference, and it is my humble duty to do that. Transforming a Nation Conference Communique. Date November 10th, 2023, in Nairobi, Kenya. Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, KAS, a distinguished German political think tank close to Christian Democratic Party with a presence in over 120 countries worldwide, spearheaded the Transforming a Nation Conference held on November 9th and 10th, 2023 at Nairobi's Radisson Blu Hotel in Upper Hill. Rooted in a commitment to fostering democracy and economic